The first item on the agenda is the roll call of commissioners and non-voting ex officio members from Secretary Bobo.
Yes, when I call your name, please signify that you are here by saying present or here. Chair Nolan Eccles. Here. Chair Sheridan.
Here.
Commissioner Crossland.
Here.
Commissioner Dwight. Commissioner Garth. Commissioner Grant.
Here.
Commissioner Intagliata. And I do have a note saying that Commissioner Riley wouldn't be able to be present this evening. That leaves myself, Secretary Bobo. I am present. And now I will call the ex officio non-voting members. The Honorable Joseph Vollmer, Director Casey Milberg, Ms. Tiara Thomas, Director Christine Ingracia, City Councilor Sheena Hamilton, Director Sonia Gray, and finally, Mr. Jake Hummel. That concludes the roll call of commissioners.
Thank you, Secretary Bobo. The next item on the agenda is the Charter Commission charge from our Vice Chair Sheridan.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. The city's governing document approved by voters in 1914 is the city charter. On April 4th, 2023, the St. Louis City voted to establish a charter commission to recommend changes to this charter. The commission's process involves seeking input from the community and listening directly to community members. The purpose of this hearing is for St. Louis City Charter Commission to hear directly from the public its recommendations and requests for the St. Louis City Charter. This is the second of 3 hearings that Commission will host. And we open it up. We'll have plenty of time today for breakout sessions to hear from everybody. Thank you.
We will now turn to agenda item number 4. For the next hour, these proceedings will be in a temporary recess as commission members divide up into their 3 working groups and invite you, members of the public in attendance here tonight, to share what is on your minds, to discuss, ask questions, and share your thoughts on charter revisions. We will adjourn to 3 classrooms we are using as breakout rooms. You will find the rooms are to your right, these doors, and a few steps down the hallway when you exit the room. Commission staff will assist and direct you to the rooms once you exit this room. Staff members, would you please stand and raise your hands? Thank you. You will see signs on the doors of the 3 classrooms, one of the breakout sessions for each of the 3 rooms. Go to the door marked Work Group 1 if you're interested in discussing the following proposals: Board of Public Service, Art Museum and Zoological Park, franchises, Department of Finance, Board of Estimate and Apportionment, City Bonds, Public Works and Improvements, Improvement Bonds and Funds, City Park Protection. Go to the door marked Work Group 2 if you are interested in discussing and proposing charter revisions for the following articles: incorporation, elections, recall of elective officers, Board of Aldermen, initiative, referendum, licenses and taxes, special tax bills. Go to door marked Work Group 3 if you're interested in the following revisions for articles pertaining to the register, the mayor, city officers and employees, law department, city marshal, city courts, civil services, eminent domain, miscellaneous provisions. These sessions are open to all attendees, and you may move freely from room to room. For our attendees viewing this public hearing through live stream at home, start checking back after an hour or so. Once the breakout sessions finish, we will meet back here in the auditorium, and representatives from each breakout room will report on the discussions that took place. Is there anything any member of the commission would like to add before we go into the recess and breakout sessions? Okay, we'll be back in an hour. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have returned to the main room. For everyone at home, we're moving into agenda item number 5, which is reporting from the work group listening sessions. We're going to start with work group 1, if you could report and/or have members of the public that could add to your conversation to step to the podium if they would like to speak.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll give a quick summary of some of what we walked through and heard, but of course, if anybody that was in the room, as was mentioned by the chair, you're welcome to come and share. So we had a set of proposals from our work group that were discussed across the last few months and grouped in our packet. We also included a set of recommendations that were not approved by the work group but were submitted by Director Bradley of the Board of Public Service. So in conversation, we heard quite a bit of conversation around the Board of E&A and the role of the comptroller, talking about audit functions within the city, talking about contracting processes, how that interacts with service delivery across the city. There was a robust discussion about public service, and that being a really vital and important area and issue that we should be looking into, like the administration and the delivery of services across the city. And so there was some conversation about what additional ways our work group or others could think about reforms that would improve that delivery of service. There was conversation about, along with the city manager or a strong mayor, that there's also a third way, which is a city administrator. And so there was an encouragement to dive deeper into that city administrator model. We talked about the role of the county offices. The Charter Commission does have control of doing shifts to county offices besides the circuit attorney's office, but we had conversations about pros and cons and whether that would be a direction, and heard some thoughts from the community members there. We talked quite a bit about the need for a promotion and awareness building campaign around whatever changes we do propose. That's very, very vital, and that we need to be investing in the education effort so that people understand really how this could affect their daily lives. We also heard a little bit something that was interesting about Missouri state law, especially thinking about checks and balances of our kind of 100-year-old system around our budgeting process and the role of the Board of E&A. And we had an interesting testimony around state law that actually mandates in budgeting for any municipality or county across the region, that there are some things built into that already around having a balanced budget, around some transparency efforts. So that was interesting, and we're going to take that back. There was quite a bit of conversation all in support of a Department of Transportation, that kind of streets, traffic violence and safety, refuse is also underneath that kind of having a shared planning vision there would be incredibly impactful, and is something that I think some community organizations also heard as one of the top issues in their conversations with community members. And then we talked even further about sort of the heavy and light reform to the Board of E&A that our work group presented to the full commission.
Thank you. Work Group 1.
There were a number of very, very good points made and a number of excellent suggestions. It basically boiled down to 6 substantial suggestions. Almost everybody who participated in our listening section referenced that number 11 in our Make Voting Easier package is currently not legal, and that could be problematic, which we were aware of, but we felt there was lots of interest in having it in there as well. But that's a very valid point. There was some input that moving elections to August and November with greater participation, that's beneficial. One of the suggestions is that both on an interim step or in a general step, consider moving the elections instead of on a federal cycle, on an odd year cycle, which was a helpful suggestion and thought-provoking. The third suggestion, which is broken up into two parts, is that moving elections to August or November, where the ballot's longer and there's more things on it, and that we have approval voting in the city for citywide figures, could be both create some electoral confusion and some electoral or ballot fatigue. So, and that's valid input, and we were thrilled to get it. And then on our second set of recommendations, which are reference the city moving to a city council in name with some structural changes, the two inputs that were brought were that our suggestion to have the president of the council elected from within the council rather than citywide could be seen as less democratic, as less accountable, which is a good suggestion. And then there was also a suggestion, and it had been part of our thinking, and then we removed it at this point, is to have some portion of the council members, the current Board of Aldermen, be elected both by ward and have some who are elected citywide. So you'd have a combination of both on there. So, and there was actually a single transferable voting, which is something that we'll look into now, was suggested as a way to accommodate both ward voting and at-large or citywide campaigns and still make it equitable and fair and even. So, and that's about it. Travis, do you have anything to add? Do we want to ask if anybody from our group wants to? Sure. Any thoughts from anybody who participated? Did we encapsulate everything in there, Ben?
You captured a lot. One thing I wanted to point out, because I think almost uniformly people in the room were concerned about a combination of fatigue and confusion between different types. You know, it is worth pointing out that almost every place in the state uses different voting methods for different offices on the same ballot. But one thing that we did not discuss but may help with this, I realized after David talked about the county offices, is making...
Pardon me, could you just tell us who you are and...
Sorry. Hi, I'm
Yes,
Benjamin Singer. I'm the CEO of Show Me Integrity, Missouri's good government reform organization. Thank you, Scott. After David mentioned the county offices, it made me realize we had not discussed making approval voting uniform across all city offices, both county and municipal. I don't know if that's something you considered and disregarded, or if we just haven't considered it yet.
Good.
That's it. Thank you.
Good suggestion. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Work Group 2. For Work Group 3, we would like to start with the fire and police individuals that came to our work group with questions for Commissioner Grant. If you could take the podium and microphone at this time to ask your questions to Commissioner Grant regarding the collective bargaining proposal. And then myself, Commissioner Crossland, and Commissioner Bobo will summarize Work Group 3.
Good evening. My name is David Rodriguez. I'm the Secretary Treasurer for Local 73 St. Louis Firefighters, as well as a city resident. One of the questions that myself and Mr. Steiger had was about the proposed amendment to Section 13. What was the purpose of that addition, and maybe what is some of the intent? That was something that we got into, because as we read through it, it talks about the Board of Aldermen in the form of an ordinance being able to adopt, modify, or reject negotiated terms that the bargaining unit has negotiated with the director.
Sure. So, I'll just preface this that I'm a longtime union attorney, and I've dealt extensively with the city over the years and other public entities and bodies related to public sector bargaining. And so this proposal that I developed, just let me speak a little broadly at first. I have felt that personally that it's very important to enshrine the value of the right to collectively bargain, enshrine that in essentially our most significant document for the city, because we value the voices and input of city workers. That should be respected, and that collective bargaining has proven, I think, and again, to be a way to develop tailored solutions to problems between the city and its workers in ways that benefit both the city, the workers, and taxpayers. So the language here that you're speaking about specifically about upon completion of bargaining, any agreement shall within 15 days be reduced to writing and then presented in the form of an ordinance for adoption, modification, or rejection. So that language pretty much comes from state law right now, Section 105-500, which talks about how when there's any agreement reached between a public body and its entity, it has to be presented to the controlling body, and the actual words are for adoption, modification, or rejection. So that's to the agreement as a whole. What that would say is if it's adopted, then it goes into effect. The term modification or rejection doesn't give the Board of Aldermen unilateral power to rescind any agreement or to stop bargaining. It just, that language is, I think, fairly interpreted to mean that when it's presented to the Board of Aldermen and they either reject it in whole, or if they say we don't like this particular provision on overtime or truck manning or something like that, we want to change it, that it then will be returned to the parties for further bargaining. It doesn't mean that there's an impasse. It doesn't mean necessarily that it doesn't allow any unilateral rescission. It just sets forth a process for resolving that rejection at that moment. So,
Okay. At glance for us, it seems that it adds an additional layer of bargaining. We bargain with the director who represents the city. So that's as it is now, that's where our terms are met and agreed upon. So that kind of, it eliminates the director, it usurps the director, empowers the director.
So this was actually a topic at our work group session right now, a couple days ago. So this proposal doesn't change anything about who is authorized to bargain on behalf of the city, whether it's the personnel director or someone else. It doesn't get into that level of detail, so it wouldn't change that. So historically, and I think there's been a little debate about whether it authorizes the personnel director to be the spokesperson for the city, or if it's just historically been that way. I know the director of operations has been involved in the past, but regardless, this would not affect that. I personally thought in that level of detail, something better addressed by an ordinance than a charter provision.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And there was one final part. It was mentioned something about making sure that people were represented, or do you remember the language that was
I'm sorry, I
said?
didn't quite hear that.
There was a comment made about making sure about equal representation, or making sure that all members were represented. Do you remember that? Does anybody remember that comment?
Well, that's not specifically addressed in this, I mean, there's the note.
No, it was not addressed here. It was addressed it was mentioned in our work group, and I asked for clarification on it, and they recommended that I speak with you since this was your amendment, and nobody wanted to speak, give the wrong information.
Yeah, so I think I know what you're getting at. If you're talking about the nature of the representation, whether there has to be fair treatment of all members and how like a bargaining agreement is negotiated, is that what you're asking? Or
Yeah, I wish I would have wrote down the exact verbiage there. I just want to ensure that this isn't an attempt to add multiple, bargaining groups or anything for any single
There
working
would be
work group.
This follows the existing model under
Okay.
both state and federal law that would provide for exclusive representation, meaning that if there is a designated bargaining representative elected by a majority of employees, it wouldn't change existing representatives either. So there are right now a number of employees in the city who currently have collective bargaining representatives, firefighters,
Yes.
police, some of the trades. There are also large swaths of employees who do not have
Yeah.
representation. This would do nothing to alter existing representation or collective bargaining agreements. But if there is a process where the firefighters years and years ago were selected as the exclusive representative, that would be the same. So-
Right, okay.
And so there is a process, just don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but there is a process under state law by which unions are selected through elections to be the representative. So.
Okay, thank you.
I think an important part of clarity from our meeting the other day, too, is that in our meeting, towards the end, it was identified that, of course, the city supports collective bargaining. However, the language that is currently being recommended, the intent may be there now, but the language is such that when it does speak to modification and changes, that can be interpreted several years from now.
Right.
With regards to the Board of Aldermen potentially saying, we, want to turn down an agreement, or you need to go back to the bargaining table because we don't agree. And I believe that we've agreed that that language does need to be modified to be more specific in what that role actually will be.
Yes, I would agree with that. 'Cause one of the things that I saw that was a positive that we saw initially was that it would codify some of our collective bargaining agreement as ordinance, which gives things a little bit more teeth. But those were concerns, again, about when we talked about intent. The intent today could differ than it does tomorrow and 2 tomorrows from now. So those are concerns that we have. And we've seen that with all bodies of legislation. So, thank you.
Yes, my name is Daniel Sesh. I have a question for the representative from the firefighters, which relates to the response. When an agreement is negotiated by the bargaining committee and management's representatives, the bargaining committee in most unions, I'm not sure that's the case here, goes back to the membership and asks for ratification. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's
So therefore, the membership could, in fact, reject the tentative agreement. Yes. Membership could reject that. So in a sense, isn't that the same as perhaps the Board of Aldermen rejecting it? That you know, it doesn't invalidate the value of the bargaining committee, nor invalidate the role of the management negotiator, but there's another party, in your case it's the membership, and in their case it's the Board of Aldermen, that could and say, go back to the bargaining table, we don't like this part of it.
Please.
So, yes, absolutely, we would bring the agreement back to the membership for ratification. The difference there is, so our leadership that goes to the director's office to negotiate the terms of our CBA collective bargaining agreement are elected by the membership. When we take it down to the Board of Aldermen, we're adding in a layer of political influence, and that's just a concern, and that concern was echoed a number of times throughout our entire work group for all areas. I can't say for every individual, I don't want to speak for everybody, but it was echoed a number of times by myself that every time we interject an area for political influence, that it just can create a conflict of interest. I don't believe that at any time public safety should be influenced by politics. And so that just adds a layer of it, not necessarily with the CBA portion, but other areas for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Crossland and Commissioner Bobo for the summary regarding Work Group 3.
Hello? Okay. In addition to the questions that have just been raised here with regards to the amendment, which originated in Group 1, but was part of personnel and therefore was addressed also in Group 3, there were a number of other issues that were discussed in our session. I was trying to figure out how to be able to kind of encapsulate them, and I think one of the themes that we heard was having to do with finding ways to avoid conflict of interest, potential conflict of interest. That right now, whether it's oversight, whether it's audit versus finance committee, whether it's the city councilor's office, and what some of the people in the room cited as issues that were potentially of conflict there, having to do with different issues. There was a concern about conflict, and so we talked about one of the proposals that we have within Group 3, which is a more radical approach, probably referred to in Group 1 as ENA heavy, which has to do with removing the Board of Estimate and Apportionment and establishing 3 separate units: the legislative, the Office of Public Advocacy, and the executive branch headed by the mayor, with the controller's position being divided between the audit function, which would go to the Board of Public Advocacy, and oversight, et cetera, ombudsperson, all of these kinds of functions becoming part of Board of Public Advocacy, becoming part of the Office of Public Advocacy, operated in New York City at this point, with finance then going to the executive branch. And we mentioned that a little bit. There was no strong feelings uttered one way or another. There was concern expressed by some people within the room about how that might further politicize certain kinds of government functions right now, but no resolution to that or numbers or validation at this point to be able to prove that it would politicize more than it is currently. And there was also then concern about another portion, a bundle of that where that proposal where the mayor would be given authority to hire and fire his or her cabinet at that point. And we talked about who are the cabinet members and what the value of that being versus the negative of it. Once again, no resolutions, but issues that were brought out and discussed. The final thing then that I believe within that proposal we discussed had to do with the personnel department itself and two portions of a proposed bundle of changes there. One being that the mayor would like to see the personnel director, the ability to be able to hire and fire that individual. The director, Director Jenkins Gray, has recommended that that position remain a civil service position instead, with the termination component remaining with the Civil Service Commission itself. So that's one area of debate. And a second one then that we discussed, and it wasn't really an area of debate, we didn't get very far with it, has to do with the lists, the city lists that are used right now, and the desire of some departments to be able to have more flexibility in the number of applicants that they can review and hire for positions. And our proposal that really the hiring department can determine whether they want a minimum number of the qualified applicants to be returned to them, which might be of interest in departments where there might be 175 people or more who have qualified for a certain service-related position, et cetera. But in other departments, the hiring individual may want to be able to say, I want to be able to receive every qualified applicant to review for the position. So that then we also began to discuss, but didn't come to resolution in terms of which was best. But it seemed like it made sense that that government should be able to look at every qualified employee and be able to choose, rather than simply look at a small list or a large list, depending on whatever the number is that is decided to be forwarded to them. Is there anything else that I missed? Commissioner Bobo? Okay. Commissioner Nolan Eccles?
Thank you. So I would like to add to that before we move to the next agenda item is that we also received, or we were asked to pay attention to the report given to us by CAPCR, and it's a statement related to the actual issues of independent counsel for oversight pertaining to how the city councilor's office or the city in itself addresses the issues that may not be reflective of the city in its entirety. So I believe we have that report now, and we're going to take that into consideration also in Work Group 3 going forward. We also had discussion pertaining to the city administrator topic as well, as it is an alternative option pertaining to the special meeting that we did have outside of the mayor or city manager structure. Lastly, we discussed, I want to make sure that we added to that topic the initiative article and proposal that I put forth pertaining to the Charter Commission article that was passed by way of the ordinance that made all of us possible here by appointment to address the continued phasing of addressing the charter, as this commission will not be able to address all aspects of the charter in its sitting. Pertaining to continued and, I'm not going to say regular, but continued addressing of the issues pertaining to the charter and having it addressed over time in phases is basically what was outlined in my recommendation pertaining to the initiative article. It too was brought up by the League of Women Voters how are we going to address the total concept or the issues in which we may not be able to get to in this body. So I believe that addressing the initiative article where the Charter Commission is reflected will address that concern from the public. If we do not have any additional members of the public who would like to speak, the next item on the agenda is to adjourn, and I would like to entertain a motion for adjournment. Do we have a second?
It has been moved and properly seconded that we are adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.